Alright, how's it going? I haven't made a video in a long time because I finally got some time. Life's rough when you work and have kids. But I wanted to nerd out with you guys, all few guys, and I wanted to talk about some nerd stuff. I need it. I need it. It's good for your soul. I've been noticing, I still watch a lot of the D&D YouTube and everybody complaining about how D&D YouTube is dying and whatever. Um, it's not. I don't think it is. I think it's just maybe it's contract. I don't know. Who cares, right? We're still gonna nerd out. We're still gonna play. So whether or not there's people making money off of making videos about it, we're still gonna play. But one of the things I've noticed is that people are looking for new things to play because they're finally getting tired of 5th edition. And there's that sort of eternal argument that's of the sort of old school versus new school, the OSR versus the sort of more 5th edition crowd and maybe the Dagger Heart crowd, these kind of new editions, new play styles. And I kind of wanted to just kind of mention like why it is that a lot of us old school gamers still like the OSR type kind of stuff, and right, and why we have a bit of I don't say a revulsion, but like some apprehension. There's stuff about the new kind of stuff that we just don't like that much. One of those things, really a lot of the main difference is that when you play D&D, and I started younger than most. I started in the 80s in like middle school, right? And I started on this book here, right? So I have like my original D&D book, and I read the hell out of this back in the day, and it was Byzantine for me, and it's only like 40 pages, right? But it was difficult. But what you find is for old school Dungeons and Dragons that a lot of it was left up to the DM, right? There's just not that many rules to cover, which is odd. In old school DM, there were rules, and there were rules about weird things that you wouldn't think needed rules, right? Like weapon speed and that kind of stuff. And now you don't have those kind of rules, but there were so many things that were just left up to the DM, right? You didn't have skills per se. And a lot of time what that ended up resulting in is a style of play where rather than say I move my 2 movement actions and I use my this action to do this and I use my this action to do that and then I attack, you would just say I move over there and is there a curtain? Well, I grab the curtain and I throw it out in front of me, and you would kind of get a feel for it, and your actions were not so structured, right? It wasn't I'm gonna do this A and then do B action and then do whatever, right? Some from whatever list of things that you were given to be able to do, right? You ended up just kind of making it up as you went, right? You would just say what you want to do, and it was much more immersive in that way. Like I really sort of miss that, and I still kind of play that way, but for old school players, like we really enjoyed that, right? And what you find is when you play the newer editions, and I say newer editions, but I'll get to that in a second. But when you play the newer editions, people don't really play that way anymore. They're really look through the rules, and the DMs, they're constantly referring to the rules. How do I do this? Well, let's see what the book says about what can I do if you're like, I want to grab my cup of wine off the table and throw it at this guy, do I get it in his eyes, right? And you're like, well, okay, let's see what the rules, thrown weapon, blah, blah, blah. And whereas in old school D&D, you would just say that, and the DM would be like, yeah, okay, you're roughly 6 feet across to this big wooden table. Yeah, I'll give you roll this, right? I'd say you got a better than 50-50 chance of getting in his eyes, right? And he would just make it up on the spot, and the game flowed very good. And the old school DMs were pretty good at making that happen, right? Because they were just kind of used to playing that way, right? They had the chops to do it. And what you find is with a lot of the newer DMs, they want to stop and slow down and look at the rules, and players want to argue a lot. Rules lawyering became a thing a lot more because there were so many more rules, right? Like it it just feels like the old school, like it was much harder to rules order because it was very much up to the DM, and you still argued with the DM, right? And you still had rules like there still was like stuff like the collar, like you don't really do that anymore. Like there was supposed to, like the old DMG books would say the collar does this, right? And that was the person from the party who was supposed to say what you were doing, right? uh, you don't really do that anymore, and there's no sort of rules for that, right? But there were rules back then, but it was just much more free form, much more, what they call theater of the mind type stuff. But the way you ended up playing was that you in a more immersive way, you weren't so structured, right? Like it was very unstructured how you approach things, and it ended up being much more imaginative and much more flexible, right? Whereas now when you play, it seems like it's their turn. Okay, I've got this list of actions that I can do, and I'm going to do this and this and this, right? Now, so, and I've noticed like the younger players like that. They like that structure, like, and maybe it's just because I don't know, it's a younger generation and they're not used to playing that way, right? And they're a little more uncertain. Like I'm fine with DM rulings, most of the time. Um, Sometimes a DM ruling annoys you, but you let it go, right? And you're like, well, let's just play. All right, whatever, right? And there was also the lethality of of old school D&D was significantly more lethal. I mean, early editions like this one were just like brutal, right? I mean, they were constantly just save or die moments, right? And you had, I mean, I literally remember a campaign we did, and I think this was actually AD&D, but we were going to do it was the Temple of Elemental Horrors or something like that. And the DM said, okay, everybody roll up 3 characters. And I'm like, okay. And there was like 4 of us. And so we had like 12 characters. And before I even got to the damn temple, one of my guys died. And then when we got to the temple, I like searched the statue for getting in, and I set up a trap, and my second guy died. And we're not even inside the damn dungeon yet, right? And just like, and I had a blast. I was like, what? But like you didn't get so attached to your character because they die a lot, and it wasn't necessarily about world building. It was very much more about like we're going on an adventure, and it was a lethal adventure. You were probably going to roll another character at the end of this adventure for the next one, right? And that's why the sort of randomness was so fun, right? Because sometimes you would get a pretty badass character, and maybe they would last a little longer, right? Maybe you got a good con, you got a good strength, a good dex, whatever. They were particularly good, and they lasted a little longer, but you never really got attached. So the random, you weren't creating a character that you planned on playing for a very long campaign necessarily, right? And then you come into the new school. Now that old school feeling kind of continued into second edition. Second edition certainly had more structure to it. It cleaned up a lot of the rules, and it was a very fun edition. Like some of my best memories are playing second edition. Like I really loved second edition, so much so that like I was really hesitant to start playing third edition. And third edition is really where the new school kind of starts, right? Where rules were much more streamlined. I mean, in many ways, they're technically better, right? They functioned a little better, kind of. Right. In principle, if you were just using the player's handbook, they would work good. What happened with third edition, and this is the beauty and the pain in the ass of third edition, was that they had prestige classes and all this variability, which was super fun, right? You had all these feats to choose from, all these prestige classes you could dip into, and you could make these insane characters, right? These very colorful, flavorful, sort of hodgepodge characters. They're just so infinite possibilities, and it made it a lot of fun. It made you want to go out and buy a lot more books to see the new feats, so you're like, hey, look, what was it, the Aberrations book had a feat. This was my favorite combination to do back then. There was a feat called Ocular Spell, and you could store spells in your eyeballs and then release 2 spells out of your eyeballs as a full round action, right? And you could take Ray of Enfeeblement and maximize it to 4th level, and you could fire 2 maximized rays of enfeeblement at something in one turn, which would do like 16 points of strength damage, which was enough to knock out almost any monster, right? So it's just one of those things that you could do in 3rd edition. But that was where like it transitioned to, out of Thaco and into the whole D20 system, and that part was actually much more workable and much more streamlined. There were kind of rules for how players progressed and how levels progressed, and everybody was now 1 to 20 level, whereas old D&D, Beck Me and stuff were like they achieved balance sort of through different experience levels for different parties. So when you had a party, if you lived long enough, people would be of different levels, right? Inevitably, right? Because magic users had the slowest progression of all, right? And they were significantly more powerful at the higher levels, right? That was kind of acknowledged in the game. And 3rd edition and subsequent editions, maybe not 4th edition, we'll talk about 4th edition later, but magic users are still kind of overpowered, right? It's really magic and spells that break the game at higher levels, or at least the primary culprits. But that kind of a new school, once you get into 5th edition, right? 5th edition is very new school, and to me, when I looked at 5th edition, it was very much like 3rd edition, but with training wheels, right? It was a much more contained, of the sort of fun chaos of 3rd edition that let you do so much and had all this just wide variety of crazy things you could combine. Very much gets compressed down in 5th edition, and it makes it feel too streamlined for me, right? And for a lot of old school players, where it's just like you have your action, and then you have your attack, and then you have the ever wonderful bonus action, whatever that does, right? Which whatever that is, right? It can be anything. I don't want to get into it. Like, that was my least favorite. Like, what the fuck does this even mean, right? But and there's certainly things not to like about all the editions, right? But that core difference between old school play and new school play is I think the structure, right? Is that new school play is so structured. Like it's very much a do this and then do this and then do this, and it's like plug and play things that you do, rather than imaginative and I just do whatever kind of comes to mind. I pick up the chair, I hit him, I draw my sword, and I smash, whatever, right? Instead, it's I do my, whatever good action is that for my class. I fire my fire arrow if you're a ranger, or whatever that fire blast, whatever your little list of things, and it becomes very mechanical, right? And that is what actually made me not like 4th edition, right? Other than 4th edition had a lot of sort of problems. It was actually a very functional, very well balanced game, and the problem was it was just kind of too well balanced, right? It just became not fun because everybody was doing the same thing over and over again, right? And it makes the games less interesting and less fun, right? It's more fun when you're being imaginative and you're just like, I climb up the windowsill, and I get up on top of the building, and as they come by, I jump down with my sword or whatever. I hit them in the head with a hammer. And there's generally not rules for that sort of thing, where you're like, okay, and then let's look up the rule. How much damage you do if you're flying 15 feet in the air and you come down and your hammer does this, and all right, well, you get 2d6 per 10 feet, that kind of stuff. Just like it mucks up the game, right? Whereas an old school DM would just be like, okay, awesome, I'll let you do double damage if you hit, or something like that, right? You just make something up and you're like, cool, let's go. And it lent itself to that kind of play, and the new editions just don't seem to lend themselves to that style of play. And it's not to say a good DM can't let you do that. They can, and some do, but people just don't do it. And maybe it's just the younger generations that were never used to playing that way just haven't sort of caught on. But for whatever reason, it doesn't seem to happen that way, right? It seems very structured and very boring frankly. That's why it's what everybody complains about is like combat takes too long. If you're saying things like combat takes too long, that means you're not having fun while you're doing it, right? Because nobody says we had fun for too long, right? It got tedious and boring, and what makes it tedious and boring is that goofy combat that's highly structured. It just becomes predictable and boring, right? And then the other part, of course, is the new school is very much more focused on world building, and your characters basically are heroic, not just heroic, like they're like legendary figures, and you really invest more time in building up the role play aspect or maybe the story aspect, and I'm kind of fine with that part. It doesn't bother me. Like I'm fine playing that way. Although I tend to get my characters killed still, right? But it's just I don't know. Um, I'm fine with like the story aspect. Even when I play with our DM group, I actually enjoy seeing what my friends come up with, right? Whatever crazy, eccentric world they decide to create, I want to be a part of it. I want to see what's going on there. What you got for me, right? And I'm here for you, right? Throw me into your imaginary world, right? This gives me a break from reality. I like that aspect of the new school, and if you like that, like old school was not. It just didn't seem to be that way. Now they did have rules, like you used to have strongholds, and you would do these kind of things that I never really got into in the group setting. Sometimes I would, I'd play a lot. But I would do stuff by myself, and I would design strongholds, and that was kind of fun. But once you sat down to play, like it was not like it became accounting. Like that part wasn't actually fun to do with the DM and other people, right? It was there, but it was like maybe it was too fantastical. I don't know. I very much more enjoyed just being a part of a story. Let's go. Let's explore. Let's do stuff, right? Like I don't want to spend my day going shopping, right? Stuff like that. Like it just wasn't like as character story driven. Like I'm still like I still have trouble like when people I'll DM games and people have people give me like 2 pages of like character background. I'm like fuck man, I'm not gonna read all this. Like your character background should be like 2 paragraphs, like if that, right? It could be depth like okay, let me I'll see if I can work all that stuff in, and I do occasionally try, but it's like it's just I have a word get away with it. It's just like I'm just too lazy for that stuff. So anyhow, those are like the sort of major differences that I see in the old school and new school. So if you're looking at what to play, right, think about those styles. Like if you've played a lot of 5th edition, try the older editions, right? And I would recommend either 2nd edition or actually Castles and Crusades, right? Castles and Crusade is like a cleaned up version of 2nd edition, and 2nd edition was a lot of fun, right? It was a good edition. And if you haven't tried that old school style of play, give 2nd edition a try, right? Now, if you really want to go nuts, right, and just have a lot of options, like the 1st and 2nd edition don't have the kind of mass. 2nd edition was a lot better than 1st. It built on that core of just like the core D&D is fighter, thief, magic user, cleric, right? You had those were basically your options, and then like elf was like 3 of those things, and then you had dwarf. But 2nd edition started giving you options, right? And then 3rd edition just went nuts, right? 3rd edition is a very fun edition, and it's probably the easiest one if you want to kind of see what a more fun version of 5th edition. Now it does require a more well-read DM, right, to sort of manage the 3rd edition rules, but really any DM that's been doing this long enough can jump into any edition, right? With like just a couple hours, you kind of read it over, like, all right, I get how it works, and you can kind of go into it, right? If they're good DMs. 3rd edition is a lot of fun, right? And if you have a good DM, it can be a lot of fun, especially the player side of 3rd edition was real fun, right? I mean, you had so many. This is why Pathfinder became so popular, right? And if you like third edition, first edition Pathfinder really built on 3.5. Like, they really blew it up, and it had so much flavor. It was so much fun. And I still, it's probably still my favorite edition is the Pathfinder version. And after that, second edition, and fourth and fifth edition. Fourth I couldn't stand. I just could not play it. Like, I tried it a few times, and it's just not fun for me to play. Now, it is, I don't say it's a terrible game. It is probably the best designed version of D&D, and that's kind of the problem. It is just too structured, right? And 5th edition scaled that back, and it went back to a more 3rd edition feel, but with just a lot of training wheels, right? Just to sort of keep you contained, and tried, and somewhat unsuccessfully, right? Like, the whole point was to not I mean, 3rd edition characters could get insanely overpowered, right? And they tried to scale that back for 5th edition, and it still didn't work because they had so many guardrails, right, that even the monsters just feel nerfed in 5th edition to me. Like, you have to throw those rules out. That was maybe one thing that 4th edition did right that I had been doing since 3rd edition, was like minion rules. Like, I just made certain monsters just take 1 or 2 hits, and I don't even write down their hit points. They got hit once, they got hit twice, they got crit, well, then they die. And I would make up their saving throws and attack bonus, and that was it. Like, their whole entry that I would use was like 5 lines, right? As lazy as possible. Maybe I'll do a video on that sometime. But what was I saying? 3rd edition, right, had a lot of fun for players, a lot of fun to play, a little more difficult for the end, but you could kind of scale up 3rd edition monsters pretty easily, right? They did have a bunch of stuff like that. Every monster had skills and stuff which you never use. You was like, okay, whatever, right? And then they had rules for supernatural damage and spell-like ability, which was like a spell, but supernatural was like a spell, but it bypassed saving throws or whatever. I can't remember. But it was a very fun edition, and if you want to play 3rd edition, definitely play that or Pathfinder, right? Pathfinder 1. If you really like 5th edition, well, I mean, you don't have to change. That's the other thing. I mean, no matter how many editions they play, there's people still playing with this, right? There are people that still use this to play and still have a lot of fun. So the main thing, right, is, are you enjoying it? Are you having fun with the edition? But if you haven't tried, if you're an old school gamer, conversely, if you're an old school gamer, man, give the new editions a try. You don't have to always be like, nope, I'm sticking to Thaco and the new editions suck. I mean, give them a try, right? At least do, 3rd edition, right? Pathfinder. Like that, there is a way to make Pathfinder and 3rd edition and even 5th edition feel old school, right? And it's your DMing style, right? Whoever's the DM can make it, as fun as possible. But that's kind of why, just my take on why the old school gamers are so hostile to the new editions. I think it's because of that structure, right? That feeling you get when you play them, where everybody's just kind of mechanically going through and just doing whatever, that makes those problems where people are like, how do I make combat flow smoother? Well, if the combat was fun, that would not be an issue that arises, right? And that, I think, is owed to the kind of style of the game, right? And why old school style OSR is still more fun. But even that is still very dependent on the DM, right? Good DM, you're gonna have fun in whatever edition, right? That's my hot take in a nutshell. Good to be back. I will try to make more videos as I get more time. I just want to nerd out, and I don't care if I get tons and tons of subscribers. Like, I really enjoy comments, especially people sharing DMing opinions, because I am an old school dork. But thank you for your time. Thanks for tuning in, and I will see you guys around, man.